Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Focus Friday with the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, representing hundreds of businesses in our region here. We've got this being recorded on Zoom. We did have a few people last minute after we found out we could do this in person here in the room with us, but we'll be recording this and putting it up on YouTube as well. My name is Douglas Marion. I'm the current chair of the Chamber of Commerce for 2023. We've got with us Mike Riley with Novant Health for being our sponsor for the Focus Friday. Mike, do you want to come say a couple words?
Sure. Thanks, Douglas, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. Novant Health is proud to sponsor Focus Friday. We've been doing this for a number of years. I think this may be the highlight of the year, so thank you, Senator Tillis, for being here today. Really appreciate that.
Who the heck else y'all had on the
The attendance for my events are not nearly as well.
Let me pull all that back. It's going to be a great event today. I can't wait. I know that you're an advocate of healthcare and an advocate of Novant. It's been a tough, 3-4 years now. The healthcare system was taxed by COVID and by the pandemic. The team members were really stressed. I saw something in at the end of last year. At the end of 2018, we had a 4.2 million nurse shortage. At the end of 2022, we have a 6.5 million nurse shortage. So we're really struggling to get talent. We used to compete with other health systems. You know, Bill and I used to compete. I saw Bill here today. We used to compete for talent. Now we compete with Walmart, we compete with Target, and a lot of other places, and the prices have just gone up to pay for labor. That, in combination with 2% Medicare sequestration rate, has cost my little hospital of 150 patients about $10 or $15 million a year. So I know you're advocating. I know you're with us on that, but just wanted to get it out there that the healthcare systems are struggling now more financially, even though before that we were there when everyone needed us to stress the system to take care of patients. So again, know you're on our side, know you're there, and happy to be the sponsor today and appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. With that, I'm going to turn everything over to Jeff Tarte. He's our public policy chair and incoming 2024 chairman of the board. Jeff, take us away.
Thanks, Douglas. As background, when we got into the pandemic, we started doing these completely virtually and by Zoom. So we're really talking to the virtual audience out there. We record these. We put them out on the chamber website for our about 1,000 members. So they have access to these, and then we open it up, put it out on social media for the general public. What we've morphed into over time is really doing these as more like a podcast. And I tease people and say, I do this in my best Charlie Rose of PBS fame, and this ends up becoming a conversation. The format has traditionally, and what we will follow today, is we'll give the floor to the senator, and he will give us a kind of a legislative update, what's going on here and around the globe, literally. And he take as much time as he wants. Nobody's going to say stop. It's your floor at that point. But then I will get into a conversation, number of questions and issues. That's typically it stays up here, but the senator is not in a huge hurry. His calendar is going to allow him to stay for a little while, and we probably can open it up to a few questions in the audience. It looks like a pretty friendly crowd. So with that, Tom and I've known Tom since before he ran for office. He's been a resident for a long time here. He's got some flaws, which we all do. He's a Tennessee ball fan, but we forgive him for things like that. We could go on and on. Most of us here in the room know him, maybe those in the audience that don't. But I will tell one story, which you've heard me tell a lot of times because it might be appropriate here. But when I first met him and he was getting ready, he was on the town board, and I introduced him once as a future member of the House of Representatives in the state of North Carolina. We all know what happened there. And then we were at another event, and he was in the House in the state, and I said, I'd like to introduce the future speaker of the state of North Carolina. And guess what happened? Then I announced him as a senator. So I want to know if he wants me to do it one more time.
Yeah, grandfather.
So Tom, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody being here.
It will be almost 23 years come this spring when baseball practice starts that Jeff Tarte and I first met each other. I moved to Cornelius in 1998. I've been coaching my kids' ball teams up in Northern Virginia. Showed up on a ball field. I've told this story before. I saw this geeky looking guy with a folder and handout. Now we're on a baseball field with 7-year-old kids, I think. And he was more or less coaching the coaches. And he also had, back then, it was a 3.5-inch floppy disk for all the baseline materials you needed to run a baseball franchise. He immediately struck me as the kind of guy that I could be a kindred spirit with. At that time, I was a partner at Price Waterhouse. He was a partner at E&Y, the second-tier firm in the big space. And we became good friends. We've known each other for years. We were friends before we were public servants, and I appreciate all the work you've done. Jeff sent me an email and said, you can speak for maybe 15, 30 minutes. We'll take questions. I'm going to stick to my standing rule in the Senate. I never do a speech that's more than 10 minutes long. I make all my staff adhere to the Lincoln second inaugural address. None of my speeches can have more words in it than Lincoln had in the second inaugural. Those were pretty profound times. If he can get it done in about 700 words, I should be able to also. So the one thing that I do ask you all to start thinking about questions. I don't mind questions where maybe you're asking me about policy trajectories that you agree with. I particularly like questions where you disagree with positions that I've taken. So first order will go to anybody that wants to ask what they would consider to be a particularly challenging question. So get your mind racing on that one, and then we'll get to the easy ones. This Congress is going to be an interesting Congress. Last Congress, I spent a lot of time working on bipartisan bills because I believe in playing the hand that's dealt you until you get the perfect hand where you win. Those folks tend not to win many poker games. We got a lot done. A whole lot done. Happy to speak about the specific policies. This Congress is going to be different because we're in divided government, and there's some organizational challenges that the House is going to have to work out before we begin to see the pipeline of bills where we can get the votes, a majority in the House and then 60 in the Senate, that's going to have a positive impact. Things that are going to be first ahead of us. The big elephant in the room that you all know is the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling I've described in the past is a lot like a Star Trek episode. Seems like a crisis. You spend about 55 minutes going around with your hair on fire. Somebody inconsequential dies. They solve the problem and they sail off to another galaxy. This is different. This is the first time in the 8 years that I've been there, and maybe the 20 years that I've actually paid attention to Congress, that we could go to the brink, and that will be bad. I hope that we can avoid it, but the challenge is real. I, for one, think that Republicans need to challenge Biden by putting together a good faith, well-founded, reasonable offer that does bend the curve on spending, but gets us to a point to where we avoid a default. It's never happened before. If it does happen, it'll have reverberations, even if it's only there for a week, because the market has to react to the worst case scenario at that point. The first stage of the worst case scenario is going into default. The second stage of the worst case scenario is how the global markets react to it. And that's a very real threat that everyone who understands that space needs to really take into consideration. This isn't one where you just, we default on the debt for 4 or 5 months and then we'll work it out. That's not how that particular issue works. The messaging on the debt is remarkable to me. I did, along with virtually every other member of the Senate, vote on some large spending bills in COVID. Now people are forgetting why we did it and saying that was an irresponsible fiscal position. If we had not done the Paycheck Protection Act, if we had not created some of those liquidity strategies, we would have lost far more than $3 or $4 trillion over time. There's no question in my mind. So people have to go back, kind of do the Wayback Machine, go back to the circumstances at the time and recognize that I'm actually shocked that most of the policies work so well. Main Street Lending Act didn't really work that well. We didn't get as many takers as we thought. Some of that was repurposed for productive outcomes. Some of it wasn't. But on the whole, I do believe that the bipartisan COVID relief policies were on the whole very positive and probably made us avoid a global financial calamity. Some of the measures that were passed after we lost majorities were not. The $1.9 trillion package had some good stuff in it that the Democrats voted for on a purely partisan basis. The Inflation Reduction Act, those two, which together constitute about $3.5 trillion more than that, north of $3.5 trillion in spending. The vast majority of those measures were not productive. But now we are where we are. We've got a debt that's got to get under control. We've got spending that we have to bend the curve on. And I'm going to be one of those people that are going to take a look at good, sound policy and make an independent decision as to whether or not I support it. That's all I got. What do y'all want to talk about?
All right, let's start this out before we just throw it completely in the open. Deal with something, because I think a lot of folks don't have an actual appreciation what your life is like. They assume you're all standing, waiting for the C-SPAN cameras to go on for your turn. Can you kind of take us through a week, 2-week period? What's the life of Thom Tillis like?
Yeah, it's when I meet with school groups or college groups, and they ask me a question, I said it's a lot like being in college. You show up, except you show up on Monday afternoon. You may have to work late on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you have committee schedules. I'm on 4 committees. You have committee schedules, so it's like going to class. You don't have any control over that. Those of us who respect the committee have a fairly high attendance record for showing up. In my case, in the last Congress, I was on Senate Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, Banking, and Judiciary. And 1 or 2 times a week, they're all meeting at the same time. So you have to figure out how you dip into one to get in the order, to ask your questions, go into another one, do the same thing, and then you're jockeying back and forth. I get up about 6 o'clock in the morning. I spend about an hour reading my overnight package. I get home around 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night, and stream mindless stuff on Netflix, and then get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and start it all over again. Over the last year, I'm probably averaging about 60 to 70 hours a week, because a lot of the negotiations that I've been involved in are like extracurricular activities. So you do all that day stuff, and then at night you're meeting on trying to revise legislation, whip votes, do those kind of things. But it's been pretty much the same churn for me for the past 8 years.
And can you share in that time period some of I know you travel, besides coming back and forth to TC, but substantive meetings and places you've had to visit, military bases, where this job takes you?
Man, I've been all over the world. I've decided I've got to go back and get a list of countries and check the box. Over the last 8 years, I've probably been to 30, maybe somewhere north, between 30 and 40 countries. When we do an international CODEL, we usually hit 3 or 4 over the course of the week. I'm going to be going with Leader McConnell and the freshmen on a code, they call it CODEL, congressional delegation, in February, and we'll go to the Munich Security Conference. I'm the co-lead for the Senate NATO Observer Group. Then we'll go to United Arab Emirates, over to Saudi Arabia, then to Israel, then up to Finland and back. That's about a 9-hour day. I'll be away from home for 3 weeks because it's at the end of a legislative session during, when the press says we're on vacation. This is our vacation. That vacation will be 3 weeks away from my family and my granddaughters that only live a half a mile from here that I'm going to go see as soon as we get. So I do have some time, but I do know that my daughter, my son-in-law, my 2 granddaughters are about to head off to the mountains, and I got to get me a little bit of grandbaby love before they leave.
So, Senator, with respect to that kind of trip, what is the intent, purpose of the trip, and what's the desired outcomes of something like that?
Every one of them's like a fingerprint. Last year, I was in, we flew into Frankfurt, but we spent most of our time in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. That was that was a twofold trip. Number one is try to get these countries to start working together. So Serbia has a little bit too comfortable relationship with Putin. Bosnia and Herzegovina has the presidency that runs BIH, but the presidency is three different people that represent three different coalitions that are constantly at odds with each other. It's a very fragile, it's amazing. You think about Sarajevo and the Winter Olympics, beautiful place, terrible place politically right now. So we're going there. You go to Serbia saying, you got to pick a team. Do you want to be in the EU? Do you want to be aligned with Western nations? Or do you want the best of both worlds? Because that's not working anymore. Particularly at this time, Putin had already invaded Ukraine. When you go to Kosovo, you're trying to say, how are you going to have a good faith effort towards Serbia to resolve your differences so you can normalize regulations, free up the border, stop acting like you're going to invade, get Serbia to stop acting like they're waiting for the opportunity to cause a conflict with Kosovo. When I was in Kosovo, I went to Camp Bondsteel, which is where we have about 5,000, mainly Marines, and Camp Leah, which was Afghan resettlement camp named after the iconic picture of the little baby being passed over the fence at HKIA during retrograde last year. We always go to military bases. So these are, and we'll fly overnight. That's the other thing, because everybody thinks these are junkets. So what'll happen when we fly out on Friday for the Munich Security Conference is we'll take off at around 7 o'clock at night. We'll refuel in Shannon, Ireland. We'll get over to Munich. We will be allowed to have shower stalls, probably at the airport. We will shower and shave there, put on suits, and go directly to the security conference. And we'll probably end the day, probably 9 or 10 o'clock at night, with some sort of a diplomatic dinner. And that's the churn. When we go to the EAU, we'll get there. It'll be the same thing. And we'll get on a plane in the morning, go to Riyadh, same drill, go to Israel. I think we spend a day and a half there, and then we'll fly back up to Finland.
So this is going to be an example where we kind of go with the flow as the conversation guides us. But since you mentioned Putin, we're talking about Europe and Asia a little bit. But what's the thought? What's this conversation on the Hill around Ukraine, around particularly with the conversation of Ukraine or wanting to potentially join NATO, as well as now the conversation of supplying tanks?
Yeah. Well, number one, everybody needs to be worried about Ukraine. Everybody needs to understand that we have national security interests that demand that we stay engaged with Ukraine. Everybody needs to understand, regardless of what the press says, NATO members to a country understand why we have to continue to support Ukraine. I tell people that I always worry about the attention span of the American people because we see it here in North Carolina all the time. We have a huge weather event here. One part of our state is suffering. Everybody's just worried. They're sending food, they're volunteering, and then about 4 weeks later, they think the problem's solved if you're not hit by that storm and you move on. But we've got people that are still recovering from Floyd. So, excuse me, it's a matter of making sure that for the same reasons that people were all behind Ukraine after February 24th of last year, those reasons haven't changed. The only thing that's happened is the passing of time. So we have to go back and be in it for the long term. The last thing that we can do is show any lack of resolve on Putin's part, because this is two-part. One, it's defending a sovereign nation. And two, it's protecting our interest and the stopping the domino effect. Putin doesn't stop in Ukraine. He goes to Moldova, he goes to the countries I just mentioned, and Serbia and BIH and Kosovo, and he tries to resurrect the Russian Empire. So we have to stay after it. What was the other part of that question?
Just in terms of the tanks.
The tank,
and how that.
I think it's a layering in. I mean, I think a part of what we're doing when we first sent the HIMARS, what it was doing. I mean, the Ukrainian military is extraordinary. They learn really quick. They're very innovative, even with things that they have. So it's more a matter of layering in. Putin got really angry with us. And I think this is an area where the administration and the DOD got it right. They started public. We never published in the past. We've never really made public what we thought the enemy was going to do within 24, 48, or 72 hours. But after Putin went into Ukraine, we started saying, hey, they're going to be there the day after tomorrow, and they're going to be there. And that just completely threw the Russian army off their game. They thought they were going to have the element of surprise. So one of the ways the Ukrainians were able to kind of regroup after they were attacked was because they were getting information that was in the public domain that had never been there before in any sort of significant conflict. So we have to, but now we're at a stage to where they've proven that they can take and hold ground. We have to continue to layer in capabilities that match up against Russia's capabilities. You start with the HIMARS, then you move in other missile defense systems like the Patriots. Then you have to move in infantry type of equipment. So the personnel carriers, but what's important when you talk about any one platform, anybody that's ever served in the military knows that to put a tank on the battlefield, you have to have personnel carriers and all the other things that protect the tank so that it can project its lethality. And so it's not as simple as say, hey, take a tank, rock on. It's here are tanks that could stand up a brigade or more. And then here's all the personnel and the materials and the supply lines that are necessary. You know, every time you put in the United States, I don't know what the ratio is in Ukraine, but for every person you have at the front line, a trigger puller, you have 13 people involved in resupplying that person. Think supply chain, logistics, transportation. So everybody's going, you're moving so slow. They've got this mental image that we're just going to, you know, fly planes over and drop M1s out of the sky. It's a lot more complicated than that, and it takes time, not to mention training on a far more lethal, far more complex platform than any Ukrainian soldiers ever been in the cockpit before.
Going to interject something, kind of doing a right turn here. I don't know, you know, coming out as, you know, business backgrounds that we have, I don't know if you, kind of the old management by objective, goals, priorities. Do you set specific priorities or goals? And kind of both sides, your personal life as well as for the Hill, but are there particular things you're looking to carry forward in this session?
Yeah, you know, we'll be doing the formal announcements next week. I am going to be moving off of one committee onto another one, but I'm going to hold up. I think Washington kind of knows where it's headed, but not going to make a public announcement until the conference vote next week. But mine are mainly driven either by committees that I'm on or committees that I've served on. I originally went on agriculture because nobody from North Carolina had been on agriculture since Jesse Helms created a relationship with the chair and the ranking member. So now that I'm not on the committee, I'm still well received when I go after ag policy.
And I think a lot of people don't realize ag is our number one industry.
At almost $100 billion and matches up against almost any state when you take a look at the number of commodities that we produce at scale, over 80 of them. When you take a look at our protein production, we're in the top 2 or 3 in the nation. So you got to have an ag portfolio. I was on aging for a while. So I use that lane to deal with aging policy, although it's not a legislating, it's more of an oversight committee. I'm on judiciary. I spend a lot of time in the intellectual property space. I don't really like the big committee. How many attorneys we got in the room? I know of one. I know attorneys just probably think it would be just awesome to be on judiciary. I don't really, I tolerate the big committee, but I love the subcommittees that I work on, like antitrust and intellectual property. We've got a big portfolio there, probably one of the most productive subcommittees in the U.S. Senate over the last 6 years since we stood it up. And Senate Armed Services, I've been on for 8 years. That's a committee where we've gotten a lot of, billions of dollars down to Camp Lejeune, Fort Bragg, and Seymour Johnson, a lot of work with the National Guard. So I always start, I just had my first meeting with my legislative staff on Monday. I said, guys, last Congress was the Congress of big rocks. We got involved with every major piece of policy that came out last year. We were at the table first, negotiating, and part of the bipartisan group that got things through. So this year, let's start with little rocks. Let's start with a lot of good things that can clean up the plumbing. It's important, but it's going to be more tailored stuff that we can probably even get done through unanimous consent. And then once we see how the Congress organizes, we'll see if this is a Congress where we can actually get big things done. I haven't decided yet. I haven't decided we can't. I just haven't decided we could. So I don't spend time on things that I don't see a clear path to an outcome.
Okay, kind of a corollary question, which just comes up, and I don't know if everybody cares about it, but you mentioned being on IP, and we're reading, hearing about TikTok. Mm-hmm. Is that really a threat? I mean, the governor here issued an executive order.
TikTok's a threat because of where it has its roots. But TikTok's really a part of a broader problem about data privacy, data security, data breach, data exploitation. We have for 4 years talked about doing something on that. The problem is it's multi-jurisdictional. It comes in the Judiciary Committee, but it's primarily in Commerce. And we've got to educate people. Europe passed what they call GDPR, data privacy, data breach law several years ago. It's not working. They've had to go back and refine it. We have several states that have kind of waded into it. Now we're creating a patchwork of regulatory regimens, so where you got to go to the worst case scenario. In this case, not surprisingly, it's California. And we've got to back up. So I think that the TikTok discussion and the broader discussion about data privacy, data exploitation needs to be taken up by Congress. That, by the way, is something that I think if we can educate our members on what we're trying to do, could be a bipartisan big rock that can occur in this Congress. The beauty of this one, the things that have a partisan sort of, you got a divide, an ideological divide to deal with, not likely much of that's going to get done this Congress. But the ones that are kind of big, meaty technical issues, but you're going to have to be hard pressed unless you're, at either end of the political spectrum to come up with a political reason not to support progress. They're the kinds of big things that we may get done in this Congress.
You mentioned serving on Judiciary Committee and obviously watching the confirmations of the justices to the Supreme Court.
4 of them.
And with that, I mean, a lot of the noise around it has died down, but is there any, real traction around the concept of expanding the court, packing it is what it's referred to?
Well, the Democrats tried to do it last year, and I have to thank Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin for not nuking the filibuster. I've told all the Republican members the day Republicans vote to nuke the filibuster is the day I retire from the U.S. Senate, because I will have voted no on it, and I would want to create a memorable moment when they destroyed that institution. I mean, this is, I know it's frustrating, but there's a reason why the founding fathers wanted to make it more difficult to get out of the Senate. That is a lazy man's approach. I had a lot of my buddies who were CEOs who were calling me up when President Trump wanted us to nuke the filibuster, and we were in a position where we could. I publicly said I'd never do it. I led an effort to sign a letter to get 61 members to agree to do it, to say we wouldn't do it. Took a lot of heat. Now fast forward, and I brought that letter up to these people that signed it when they were opposing Trump, that then went and voted on it last year. We've got to maintain the integrity of the Senate. And I've told these CEOs back when Trump wanted to do the filibuster, I said, you tell me whether or not you want a nation that every 2 or 4 years that could have radical swings in tax policy and regulatory policy. That's the one unique aspect of the United States that doesn't exist in any other country in the world. Why do you think businesses are willing to pay a premium to set up shop in the United States? One of the main reasons is because they have some degree of confidence that really bad stuff isn't going to happen every 2 years. Now, the bad news is really good stuff is hard to do, but you're not going to have these, when I worked at Price Waterhouse and helped with site selection, one of the first things you did when you were looking at a jurisdiction out in the United States, what's the near-term, long-term political stability of the jurisdiction you're considering? And you have to check a lot of them off because you didn't know. If you had an election next year that was going to change the composition of their legislative body or change the president, stay the heck away from that. You don't know whether or not the economic decisions, the economic factors you use and make a decision today are even relevant 2 years from now. That's why we have to maintain the filibuster.
So on the lower courts, particularly at the appellate level, which are uber important, can you walk us through how that process is working? I mean, we always see it becoming so politicized. But
Yeah. And on the Judiciary Committee, I'm probably somewhere around Lindsey Graham in terms of the number of Biden nominees that I voted on, even Obama nominees. There are some people that go in there and say, who nominated them? Obama. They've got to be bad. And that's not the way you look at it. You have to look at the real record. You have to look at judicial temperament. You have to take a look at what kind of activism they may have been involved in. If I've got somebody in front of me that was nominated by Biden who has no political background, they haven't made a stupid statement on Twitter, they haven't written a white paper, maybe they said something dumb when they were in college, but who didn't? Then I look at them objectively, and that's why probably, I don't know, somewhere around 25-30% of the circuit district court, which has a different set of factors because of their reach. I look at the qualities of the candidate and say it's not the person that I would put forth if we had a Republican in the White House, but we have to have a functioning judiciary. And, honestly, over the last 8 years, we look back at some of those folks that we've confirmed, and there aren't, I can't think of any. There certainly can't be many that I regret having confirmed and opposed the majority of them because they did have stuff in the record that didn't fit with my idea of the right person to serve on the bench.
kind of shift a little bit with obviously nothing passes that, has to have votes on both chambers to become codified into law. Any particular members you tend to work more closely with than the other side in the House?
Whole lot of them. I believe in transactional bipartisanship. I told this to the press. I've seen them quote me a couple of times. I said, I'm not into this kumbaya, let's all get along and let's all vote together, because if you've done that, you've lost your mooring on your worldview and your ideology. I am necessarily going to disagree with probably 60% of what my colleagues are moving in terms of legislation, at least as it's originally proposed. So transactionally, I've worked with a lot of people. I was at a bankers meeting in Texas. I said, guys, I just want to let you know, Elizabeth Warren and I are partnering up. And they're all looking like this on military families. Actually, on trying to address the nursing shortage by trying to expedite families, military spouses who have medical certifications that may not meet the threshold for North Carolina, but get them in on a provisional basis and move on. So me and Elizabeth Warren, me and Mazie Hirono on intellectual property. I look at a transaction, I look at the member's history and see whether or not this is something that they've worked on. And then I try and build something that I think sound policy. About Bernie Sanders is probably the only member of the U.S. Senate that I've never had a discussion about for some sort of bipartisan legislation for obvious reasons. So yeah, all of them, past and present.
So kind of bringing that home for a moment, what's the relationship within the North Carolina delegation, the 14 House members and both you and Senator Budd?
Well, I think it's pretty good. We had an honest disagreement with one of them, but that worked itself out. But I think the members that of our delegation are strong. In fact, I just saw Jeff Jackson on the flight up on Monday, and told Virginia Fox, we'll have a Republican members meeting, but then I want a delegation meeting to talk about how we can distinguish ourselves from other states on these economic development pursuits. When you have people come into a room, you have corporations come into a room and they see 16 people, Democrats and Republicans, saying we have our ideological differences, except when it comes to something good for North Carolina, for economic development, and here we are to help. That is it's an opportunity for us that distinguishes us from virtually every other state. Deborah Ross, I haven't had the opportunity to really spend much time with Jeff yet. But the freshmen, I'll be meeting with all of them as I meet with all the freshman senators on both sides of the aisle over the next month or two. And you're always just trying to find a touch point where you have an interest in policy, where you want to work together. And we do a lot of work on constituent work. You know, when the House member is reaching, a constituent may have called a House member and they're coming up against a roadblock. I've told all of them, Democrat or Republican, before you say you can't help them, call our office and give us a chance to weigh in. It'll still be your case. You can resolve it with a constituent. But if this gives us a better reach, or gives you a better reach, count me in as one of your constituent service resources.
One of the things that, we get in our face all the time, and it seems like it's become the norm, are all the House investigative committees.
Mm-hmm.
Do they serve a purpose? Do they have a value?
They can serve a purpose. It depends upon whether or not they want to focus on an objective outcome that they can explain to the American people, or like the oversight committees under Nancy Pelosi, be clearly focused on political showmanship. That's the choice they have to make. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt now and hope that they run it in a way that has integrity, that has balance in terms of where they're getting their information, and that their conclusions are based on facts versus a predetermined outcome that they have committees to support. And I'm talking more about what happened in the last 2 years. I don't want to repeat that mistake. Here in Washington, you tend to mirror the bad behaviors of those who came before you. And I think what we should do is say, let's be structured. Take the documents now. I mean, we got DACA-Rama, right? We got Trump, we got Biden, we got Pence, we probably got some other ones. We made a request. It was interesting. Yesterday in Judiciary, John Cornyn spoke up and said, Tom Cotton's thinking about slowing down the nominations process until we get an answer to a legitimate question. Put us in a classified setting. Let us know the nature of the documents. Now, Durbin took that, and Durbin and I have a great relationship. We worked together on legislation. Durbin had a staff come whisper in his ear, and then Durbin responded, well, we don't recall you asking for the details on the information when the revelations of the Trump documents came up, to which Cornyn said, yeah, well, we kind of did. Mark Warner and Marco Rubio from the Intel Committee issued a letter saying we wanted to see that information. We need to see all that information. And, so that's one example. And then you got people that are saying, well, what Biden did was different than what Trump did because, Trump didn't have a positive attitude. The fact of the matter is it gets down to the details of the documents. I don't care if you have 1,000 documents, none of which disclosed methods, practices, anything of national security. And if you only have one document that did, the latter is the big problem. We just need to know what the specifics are. You saw the reports with Pence. I know, I'm almost certain what's happened with Pence. When you go on these codels, you get a big book. In our case, they're not classified, they're confidential. And it's kind of like so-and-so president was born in 1960, he has 3 children, and he lives somewhere. I mean, that's the nature of the confidential document. The classified document probably only had slightly more information if it was a travel briefer. They mentioned that they were in binders in the back of people when they were packing, didn't go through. But I tell everybody, if you're reviewing a top secret document, unless you're colorblind, it's pretty easy to know what you're reviewing because it's in a big old red folder and it says top secret in red right across the top of it. That one is probably one you ought not take home or put in the trunk of your Corvette.
Or share a dinner.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get into the facts. So if we have an oversight committee in the House that's focusing on these documents, don't just focus on Biden's, don't just focus on Trump's, focus on those who have obviously had a breach of protocol, maybe a violation of a law, and do it objectively. I think the American people would respond really well to that. Otherwise, only about half the American people are going to respond well. The other ones are not.
I'll tell you one quick funny story related to that. I was on a flight once sitting next to a gentleman by the name of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an NSA former Secretary of State. We were on the bulkhead in first class. We were loading. He opens his briefcase and he's laying these folders out at his feet, kind of organizing. And they're not top secret. They weren't read, but they were obviously briefings like Pacific Rim, Asia, Europe. And I just lean over and I say, Mr. Secretary, I rushed out of the house today and I left my Pacific Rim briefing. Do you mind if I read yours? And he stuffs them off and didn't talk to me the whole flight.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, he's a good dude. The kind of shift back the big elephant, and then we'll kind of maybe open it up because we've got some time with the group. The big elephant in the room is the debt ceiling. I'm gonna let you kind of run with this a little bit, but curious on a couple aspects. What is the implications if we default? Is that even a remote possibility? Do the Republicans in the House, particularly the Freedom Caucus members, have the ability to stand pat on without spending decreases to offset some of that? And then how do we rein it in so we quit doing this?
Well, as I said when I opened up, this is the first real threat for the debt ceiling in the 8 years that I've been there. Because most people understand, particularly if you understand financial markets. If you don't, and any of you have logged into ChatGPT, how many of y'all gotten on ChatGPT? I've been on it since I'm really, are you on it? Really disappointed a geek like you is not on. I signed on to it the day after it was made public back on December the 1st.
I write all my own original stuff.
Yeah, well, ChatGPT, go out, or you could go out to Google. It'll take you about an hour. If you go on ChatGPT, it'll take you about 45 seconds. But just ask ChatGPT, which is going to be the next generation search engine that's going to make Google wish that they'd come up with it first. Just ask it, what are the consequences of the United States defaulting on its debt? It'll take about 35 minutes. It'll let you know how that will affect monetary policy, how it will affect equity markets. Even I didn't refine the question, say, well, what if it only happens for 2 weeks? That may be a little bit difficult even for AI to figure out, but it will have revert. We don't know exactly because we've never done it. But people in the economic or in the finance space predict that it will be very bad. And if we sneeze here, the rest of the world is going to catch a cold. So we've got to try and avoid it. The Freedom Caucus and the Republicans in the House and Senate absolutely get we need to bend the curve on spending. The problem we have, and you had a question about DOD spending, this is not the time to cut defense spending. Now, is it a time to look at defense and say you're not spending the money productively? So maybe we need to get off of some programs that you're on and make it more efficient, maybe get 10, 15% more productivity out of the almost $900 billion that we're spending there a year? Definitely. It's not a time to cut it. I mean, we've got a pacing threat with China that is frightening now. It used to be that we had quality and they only had quantity. Now they have quantity in high quantities with quality, particularly in hypersonics, the ability to cause us to stand. Our standoff distances now with China, the extent to which you could go to China and still protect your assets has expanded greatly. So when your standoff distances get greater, then you got to work on your reach capabilities. These are all the things that if we're not investing in, we're going to regret it. You got the threat to Taiwan. You got to be prepared for that threat. You got the threat to Ukraine and more broadly, Eastern Europe. And again, if we cut, let's say we didn't spend a dime of discretionary spending. So we said, we're not going to fund the military for 10 years. It's only about a third of the debt that you could retire over 10 years, if you chose to be invaded by an unfriendly nation and no longer cease to exist as a sovereign country. So then you have to get to non-discretionary spending, and there are proposals that we're talking about now that I told the press this week. You know, when you talk about Social Security as an example, if you talk about Medicare as an example, Medicaid. There are ways to fix the long-term solvency of those programs without dramatically impacting current and 25-year out benefits. What this is about is actually having programs that you're going to be able to look a 35-year-old in the eye and say they're going to be there when you're there. It's going to have to be dealt with. So the whole of spending has to be taken into account. If people think we can only cut the roughly 20% of discretionary spending to get out of the to retire our debt, there's just no way with anybody with basic economic experience could possibly do it. You'd have to be a magician.
So as just a point on the chat GPT, Holden Thorpe, who's the former chancellor at UNC Chapel Hill, also at WashU in St. Louis, editor of Science Magazine. So I'll give him a little insight to the geek. The current issue of Science Magazine that he wrote, he's done a piece and written up about the tool. And it's a good overview for those that would be interested in looking at it.
I didn't even know he was on my calendar. I met with Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT, day before yesterday. And because I'd spent so much time on it and evangelizing it, in fact, I have been trying to get my members to say, why don't y'all kind of get ahead of the tech curve on this one? And this is the minute I logged into it and did the first query, I said, this is going to change a lot. This is probably going to make Microsoft the premier search engine over Google. I don't know if y'all even know that Microsoft has a search engine. I never use it. Bing, because it's always been subpar. It's absolutely extraordinary. Think about going on Google now and you do a search on what Macintosh is doing. And you come up with 18 pages of links. You want to know the Macintosh law firm's practice in a given area. It comes back, if you ask it to write an essay, within about 45 seconds, it'll write an essay with perfect grammar, with just the right essay structure of whatever you ask it for. If you just do a generic query, it'll come back with a paragraph of all the stuff you would have learned if you took the 20 or 30 minutes to go through every link and all the ads that you have to go through. All that's done. And when they do the public release of ChatGPT 4, which I think happens at the end of March, beginning of April, you're going to see Microsoft embed that capability, that search capability, and you're going to continue to see GTP, artificial intelligence. People say, oh my gosh, that's scary. We can't do it. I said, okay, we can let China, Russia, Iran, they can all do it, because my guess is if we choose not to figure out how to use it in an ethical manner, then all we'll have are unethical players in the space. But it's worth investing some time in. All the people that I've finally got them to write it down so they remember what it was are now texting me over the last 2 months saying, my gosh, it's extraordinary.
My last question, then we'll open it up. We've got a little bit of time. The most important question of the day for you, and really would love your insight and opinion. Can Tennessee get back to Houston in the Final Four?
Well, so everybody knows why I'm a Tennessee fan. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, but I was raised in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I started watching Tennessee football back when I was about 13 years old. And I'm a cry when they lose volunteer fan. I've been crying for about 15 years. So I'm not going to make any prediction, because every time I do, it creates bad woogie and we don't get where we're supposed to go. So,
all right. Any questions for the senator? Mayor?
I've got one. This maybe leads you in a little different direction, Tom. And I know you know this, but I'm speaking just from my community, my little town here in Cornelius. We have a crisis going on with affordable housing.
mm-hmm.
In my market, and I'm doing all I can to try to solve that. But when it comes to little old me getting 2 or 3 emails a week, where can I turn for help? What can I do? Most recent one, one of our local residents in an apartment, they got a 36% increase. It's all tied into this inflation thing we talked about. But is there anything going on the national level related to affordable housing, workforce housing? I'm saying this in front of my state rep and one of my county reps here too, because we just need some help. I don't know where to tell these people to turn.
Well, I'm going to be returning to the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Tim Scott's going to be the ranking member. And we know that we need to do some things, but you all need to do some things too. Because there are various factors that are leading into affordable housing not being available. One of them is not having some of the federal resources you need to make the projects work. This is expanding inventory. Not only about making the current base more affordable, but how do you expand inventory, which is going to create competition, probably draw down to reasonable margins in terms of the prices paid. But I was just having this discussion yesterday in a different space. What you all need to do is rethink the burdens. We have towns and counties. I think they should be entitled to implement whatever sort of regulatory framework they want. But when they start creating the additive cost for affordable housing, you got to look at it. There are vast differences between the baseline cost of affordable housing in municipalities and counties across the state. I just told this group yesterday, the one thing I wished I'd gotten done when I was speaker, we just didn't have enough time because we had that whole financial crisis going on, a few other things we had to take care of. But what I would have liked to have done is to create a framework that says towns and counties, you can regulate to the hilt. But we're going to come up with an indexing mechanism for what we think are baseline minimum responsible code and ordinances. And if you deviate from that, that's fine. If you think it's important to your community, but that suddenly discounts the value or the productivity of a dollar that a state dollar could be spent in your area. So when you apply for a grant at the state level and all other things are equal, the jurisdiction that has the lowest regulatory burden wins. And then you decide whether or not that policy is worth keeping on the books. So that you start right-sizing regulations. Now, I'm going to try and work on that. It's a complex process, but I'm going to try and work on that for federal dollars so that we know that taxpayer dollars are being put to a place of demonstrated need with the highest probability of those dollars not going to regulatory compliance, but actually giving people an affordable place to live.
Other questions? Questions?
So,
By the way, I see Mike on Zoom. Mike's always good for a tough question, so get creative if you want to.
So building on what you were just talking about, we are such a high growth area and we do not get the support from our state capital that we probably need to do roads, interchanges, other types of things. And it's hard because we are trying to make up for the difference ourselves. And how do you recommend we navigate the needs of this community without it being always, oh, it's just Charlotte asking for more again? But we're growing so fast. I mean, how do we strike that balance?
Well, one of the things that we did accomplish back when I was in the legislature was some revisions to the TIP process. We tried to bias it more towards congestion and safety, which would clearly be two of the driving factors in the urban areas. We can't forget the rural areas, though. I mean, you've got to have a balance. And I would defer to my state and local leaders here on how you are working that out. I will go back. That gives me a reason to talk about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Anytime you're in the minority in Washington across the board, which we were in the last Congress, you're not going to get what the bipartisan infrastructure, the infrastructure bill that I would have drafted would look dramatically different from the one that I supported and helped secure the votes to get passed. 2/3 of that bill was really focused on plussing up real infrastructure. And we have to continue to remind people that you have to invest. We also have to continue, because some of y'all may remember, I took on a particularly thorny subject up in this neck of the woods called the hot lanes. If we don't come up with ways to leverage public sector dollars, you're going to have this discussion 20 years from now. If we don't start thinking about other ways to get revenue and accelerate projects, I'm here to tell you today, if we hadn't done the hot lanes, you wouldn't have additional lanes on I-77 now. Because I told everybody when we were going down that path, I said, guys, you're assuming that the tip says that maybe by 2025 you'd have them. But what happens if something bad happens in between that slows down, that reduces our capacity? What if we have an economic downturn? I didn't say, what if we had a global pandemic? But now I'm absolutely convinced that that additional capacity that we have on I-77 now probably wouldn't be in place until 2030. Can you imagine what would have happened to this community if we had 2 lanes going northbound and southbound on I-77 through 2030? Damn sure wouldn't be the growth that we've experienced over the past decade. So we got to get, as elected officials, we have to get out of our comfort zone on policies that we know we're going to take hits for. If we believe in our heart of hearts, it's the best possible solution. And that's going to require some, I think it's going to require some courage and some creativity on local governments to come up with a proposal that, to the extent federal dollars are eligible, I'll fight for at the federal level.
Bill, there's a few folks on virtual. Were there questions or just comments?
Those are most comments.
All right. Mayor?
So leading to that question, that discussion, so I sit on 3 different transportation boards. And CRTPO, we've been discussing managed lanes from the Brookshire to the South Carolina border.
And Mayor Knox, can you describe what CRTPO is, so audience?
Regional Transportation Planning Organization.
Thank you.
Used to be MUMPO, right?
Correct.
Right. We're the ones where you draw a line on the map and you'll never drive on it for a lifetime. So this project is estimated to be $2.1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
The state has a cap of $650 million on any single corridor project. So that leaves a deficit on this project of $1.5 billion. With the reduction in fuel taxes that we're taking in, we've got to lean towards federal dollars if we're going to get this done. Mm-hmm. Number one, I don't think there's any argument on that board that it needs to be done. The buzzword for us up here naturally is Centro, and this came from an unsolicited proposal who we pushed, and we found out it was Centro again, and that's a dirty word up here. And so legislatively, I don't know whether there's a way the state can increase that cap.
You may want to rub his knee again.
Somewhere to be, man. He's been very good to me at Davidson, so he's my friend. So, but this is a fine example of what that infrastructure money can do. This is not a want for the Charlotte region; it's a need. Mm-hmm. We have 300,000 people a year moving to this region, and that corridor is choked out. I was opposed to the contract for the toll lanes. I drive in those toll lanes every day. Mm-hmm. I pay, I don't know how much a month. It's just drafted. But time is money when you've got stuff to do, and I have to do it. But how do we leverage those federal funds from a board level at CRTPO to get those funneled down to the state to increase that funding in that corridor, for example?
Well, I mean, a part of what you have to do is come up with projects that conform, even if they're regs or laws that I disagree with. If they're on the books and they're used for scoring any sort of federal grants, make sure you got projects that live within the I mean, what you're doing is trying to maximize the quality of your grant application in line with whatever regs they have in place. And then as a community, try and convince the community that we should come together on it. May not be the best of all options, but it's better than doing nothing. You know, and I had people angry with me over the toll lanes. I wish that they had completed the sentence, because I believe this to be absolutely true. We would rather have nothing for the next 15 years than toll lanes in the next 5. So the opposition to some of these things needs to understand the consequences of saying no. And then as a community come together, because that matters too. When they're looking at grant applications, they complete their due diligence. They look at the environment in the jurisdiction that's asking for these funds. And it does become instructive to the final decision, because we're not unique here. I mean, I can list you 100 cities similar in demographic to Charlotte that have a mayor in and around that area that are saying the same thing. So we have to find ways to distinguish ourselves from the others by having communities and bipartisan support for what we're trying to accomplish. That's how you actually win the grant game in Washington.
All right, with that, we're kind of at the bottom of the hour, so we've taken the senator's time. I do want to real quickly.
What was the, I saw a question or a comment pop up.
Mike Milchick asked, what was the reasoning for the quarter cap?
Say again.
Quarter cap on spending
Quarter
for
cap.
transportation dollars. What was the reason for it?
Just purely fiscal. Yeah, limits, economic limits, Mike.
All right, with that, I just want to recognize a couple people, elected officials in the room. Mayor Washington. No, we're going to stay.
If y'all are tired of talking, that's fine, but I've got about another 15 minutes. I got to be somewhere in 10, or I got to be with my grandbabies by 10.
Yeah, so we'll stick around once we kind of officially sign off from the podcast, if you will. But I wanted to, again, recognize Mayor Washam, Mayor here in Cornelius, Mayor Knox from Davidson. Also wanted to recognize Commissioner Cotham from the County Board. And then, of course, our very own John Bradford, House of Representatives here in the state of North Carolina. And we appreciate all of you for the service that you all do for all of us every day. With that, Tom, it's a blessing that you serve us. I mean, I mean this in all seriousness. If we could clone 60 more of you.
Oh, God, no. I wouldn't want 60 Thom Tillis in the U.S. Senate.
It would be, we would get so much done.
By the way, I would also tell y'all, if you don't know Ted Budd, you need to reach out to him. He is a great guy. I've known him for 10 years. He is going to be a great addition. We're working very closely with his office, helping them out right now as they get established. But we'll be partners just the way I just talked to Richard Burr this morning around 7:30. I have every expectation that the productive relationship that Richard and I have are going to be, we're not going to miss a step with Ted. I'm glad to have him up here. Thank you all for sending them to us.
So on that note, November, our Focus Friday guest on November will be U.S. Senator Ted Budd. And then next month, we'll have State Senator Vicki Sawyer and State Senator Natasha Marcus will be joining us. And with that, I want to appreciate you willing to do this. We're going to have some time, so don't jump up and run, but I'm going to give the floor back to Douglas.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We've got a couple things. One last thing, I want to also thank Novant Health for being a sponsor of our Focus Friday that Jeff has put together for really through the end of the year. A couple upcoming events. Next Tuesday, we're going to have a Business Works Lunch and Learn here again in the Chamber conference room. It's going to be on AI, protecting and automating your business. Again, next Thursday, we're going to have another Business Works Lunch and Learn on identity theft and awareness. Coming up on February 16th, we've got an Education Power Luncheon. So be sure to stay tuned for that and put on your calendars or save the date for March 16th. We're going to have our annual gala at the Peninsula Club. With that, thanks again to Novant Health for a sponsor of Focus Friday. Thank you for Senator Tillis for taking the time to come out. Thank you for everyone that joined us online, and we'll have this recorded. Thanks so much. Have a great day.